I'm Fred Guttenberg, founder of Orange Ribbons for Jamie and author of Find the Helpers. You know, we all have our story. And my story really kind of went into overdrive on February 14th, 2018, the day my daughter was murdered in Parkland, Florida. But it began before that. My brother, 4 months prior to that, had passed away from cancer related to his work in 9/11. And my family was still mourning his loss when this happened. And here we are in a 4-month period, a part of two national American tragedies. And I started at some point after this all happened, thinking about how I wanted to tell my story. And what became clear to me is I couldn't tell it without talking about all of the amazing people who were either a part of my life before or became a part of my life because of. The truth is, I don't get through this without them. It is the amazing people who I call my helpers. They could be friends, they could be family. It was people in media, it was people in politics, it was strangers who gave me strength, who carried me forward, who gave me the ability to actually take the words of my rabbi at my daughter's funeral seriously and say, we don't move on, we move forward. I've been able to move forward, and it is because of my helpers. And so I wrote about that.
I can't help but think that this book is really coming out at the right moment in our country's history, with so much, death and despair in the midst of this global pandemic. Talk to me a little bit about the timing of the book's release.
The timing of this release is certainly unexpectedly unusual because this country is going through some really tough things right now. We currently have over 160,000 people who have died recently due to coronavirus. And they die alone. They have funerals alone. They are in hospitals and they are sick alone. And they have families who go through this knowing their loved one is going through it alone because of coronavirus. So families are going through the worst of moments. Well, I understand what that is. And my hope is that with this book coming out at this time, in the height of this coronavirus, as well as in the height of a really charged political environment that stresses people out, that people will read my book and start to think in terms of, who are my helpers? Who's going to help me get through it? But also, who do I know who might need my help? Listen, I'd love to say we're all overly powerful and we can get through anything all by ourselves. That's not reality. We do rely on others. We're social beings. We live in a country where, as a group, we are always there for others. We stand up for others. It's in this country's DNA. And so with everything going on right now, the timing of this book, really, it could not have been better, sadly, because it means terrible things are happening. But I hope people can find some kind of help, or will decide they're going to find some kind of help after reading the book.
You begin chapter 11 with the following quote: "Following a tragedy, you end up relying on others," which I think is at the very heart of your entire message. What makes this such a uniquely tragic experience is the fact that we're going through it alone, that our loved ones are in the hospitals alone. You mentioned something off camera to me before, and that's technology, and how technology is playing an interesting role here. Can you speak to that?
As for the time that we're in and going through tragedy, because we do rely on others. We are in this unusual time right now where being physically close isn't always easy. Thankfully, if we wear our masks, we can get relatively close, but technology has stepped in. And I do think of things like Zoom as one of the great technological helpers because it keeps us connected. It keeps us talking. It gives family members the ability to get in front of each other, in front of a computer screen, and do the same kind of reminiscing or talking or crying together or laughing together that pre-corona we might have been doing in person, but at least we still get to do it. And the in-person part is going to come back. But at least we get to do it together, even if it's through a computer screen. I can tell you, I have done a whole lot of Zoom conversations with people I love and care about, just so we can keep things normal and sane and calm between us. And it's our way of being able to hug one another, even if it's from a distance. I am thankful for these technologies. I think they're going to change the way we interact with each other. But in this moment, in this time, I just encourage people to use these technologies. You don't need to be removed from one another.
Fred, I couldn't help but think that the process that you went through of losing your brother perhaps helped you to a certain extent in the next tragedy that you were about to face just months later. Was that the case?
The process of losing my brother was a really unique experience for me, for my family. We'd never gone through loss like that before. So in the sense that we were dealing with loss and all that entails, maybe there was a little bit of help because of how close the two events happened to each other. But I can tell you, there's nothing like losing a kid. And my brother and I were very close. We had 50 years together. And I thought it was the worst thing possible what I was feeling until my daughter was killed. And it was 1,000 times worse. And maybe there was a little bit of strange comfort for me knowing he was there waiting for my daughter. But going through my daughter was a really unique experience. And I am so thankful for those that were here to go through it with me, the family that was there like that. My best friends who were there immediately. I mean, listen, they held me up. And what's so unusual, the question about my brother, they were there going through that with me as well. Really thankful for people. I'm not sure that the loss of my brother helped me, but maybe I was a little more prepared than I otherwise would have been, if that makes any sense.
It does. It does. The connection I made reading it was I got a sense that you really understood the value of people rallying around him, and if perhaps that made you more open to accept the help of others. As guys, we tend to be a little more closed off. We tend to be a little more, we want to be John Wayne a little bit, And I was just wondering if that maybe opened you up to, the love that you were now getting from the people that were helping you.
I think that's a fair point. My brother was truly, he was a giant in the world of emergency service. And watching people step up for him, there are so many moments, especially in his last month and a half of life and then his final passing, that just were so huge in my mind because of the way people were there for him. When my daughter died, I'm not really sure that I expected that. She didn't have this life of an adult where people knew her in a way that they, were going to treat her like a hero. My brother did. So when people did show up in a way for her that was just huge and overwhelming, it was something that, on the one hand, I don't know that I was totally prepared for, but on the other hand, I'm really thankful for, because, and not just for me, when I think about my wife or I think about my son, or I think about the grandparents. This show of support was huge for them as well. And my son is a fire cadet. He wants to be a firefighter. And the day of the funeral, when we got there and there were fire trucks from around the state that were lined up, I'm going to cry talking about it, that were lined up to make sure my son was okay. I'll never forget it. I apologize.
No need. No need. But I get the feeling that you came to the realization that this was going to be your life's mission very quickly. Walk me through if there was a moment where it crystallized and it clicked and you knew that this was going to be what you were going to dedicate the rest of your life to.
For me, the moment was the night after Jamie was killed at the vigil. Now, in interviewing the Parkland mayor for this book, she says she knew that the night that Jamie was killed. She said she ran into me at the hotel where we were all going for news. It was a blur. I don't remember even seeing her there because it's just everything is a blur. But she said I told her that night that this is going to be my life mission. I'm going after this. But it was a blur. But standing at that vigil and looking out at thousands of people was the first time in 24 hours that my world kind of slowed down enough for me to say to myself, we were victims of gun violence. That's where it hit me. And I went home from the vigil that night. I walked in my door and I just said to all my friends and family at the house, I don't know if I can curse on this, but I said, I'm going to break that fucking gun lobby. They're the reasons that nothing has been done and that my daughter is dead. And that night, I just knew I didn't know what that meant, how I was going to do it, what my path was going to be, or who was going to help me, but I knew it's what I wanted to do.
You've got this passion, but how do you really put it into action politically?
So, Vice President Biden reached out to me probably about 10 days after Jamie was killed on the phone. And I was shocked when the voice on the other end of the phone was Vice President Biden. I was even more shocked when we were still talking probably 45 minutes later. And during that phone call, he spoke to me, before he even spoke to me about his grief and what he's been through, he wanted to know about my family, wanted to know about me, about Jamie, about Jesse, and about my wife, Jen. He just wanted to know who we were and what we were about. And then he talked to me a bit about his family and what loss was like for them and how he got through it. And I'll never forget two words that he used with me: mission and purpose. And I said to him, I said, that's kind of the way I'm feeling, as if it's like, this is now my purpose and this is what I need to do. And he said, listen, he goes, you'll figure it out. He goes, this conversation needs your voice. And he goes, and I'll always be here if you need my help. And he meant it. And then he invited me to an event he was doing in Florida a few weeks later. It was a fundraiser. And bear in mind, he wasn't running for the presidency at the time. This was a fundraiser for Bill Biden's foundation. And I went with another one of the Parkland dads. I had thought that when we got there, we would kind of shake his hand. Shocked when he pulled us aside into a private room, because he had 200 something people waiting to hear him speak. And again, even more shocked when about 45 minutes later, he was still talking to us. About 20 minutes into that conversation, I said to the vice president, you have a room full of 200 people waiting to hear you speak? And he just said to us, this is more important. That's the kind of guy he is. During that conversation, he said something to myself and the other dad that probably has been the single most helpful thing anybody has said to me since losing my daughter. And he talked to us about going through this with our families and how no two people go through grief the same way, and to be prepared for that. And he talked to us about the reality of how many marriages fail after something like this, and how many families encounter tough times after moments like this because people aren't prepared to go through it differently. So, and he's like, I'm not trying to scare you. He goes, but I want you to have a plan. I want you to know how you're going to get through this with your family, going through it differently, but being able to support each other as you go through it, the ways that you need to get through it. He was 1,000% right. And because he gave us the heads up then, it gave me the ability to make sure I'm always working on that and that my family is going to be okay.
Did you hear from the president?
I did not. I did not hear from the president then. And I really got angered by the president only days later when we were burying my daughter. The morning that we buried my daughter, the president put out a tweet talking about what happened in Parkland, and he blamed it on the Russia investigation. And he politicized the murder of my daughter. I was enraged, to be quite honest. And when I read the tweet, I just got into this mode of being so angry. And my wife was just trying to tell me to let it go, forget about it, because we need to get on to our funeral for my daughter. But I couldn't. And the way I get through things, it's really become my tool is to write. It gets things out of me. It gets them off my chest. So I sat down and I rewrote the ending of my eulogy for my daughter because it helped me to just kind of get it out of me. And after that became public, I really didn't think I'd ever hear from the president again. And I haven't. And I'll be real honest with you at this point. There's no need to. He has failed on this issue. He has used this issue for political purposes. He's not going to stop being who he is. And I just want to be certain that I play a role in helping to have him fired.
You mentioned in the book that you avoided the media early on, and then the media became somewhat of an ally. Having gone through this, what are your takeaways with regard to the power of not only the media, but specifically social media?
Well, you know, with regards to the media and how I feel about them, I avoided them for the first week. That first week was about my family. And then a week later, the night of the CNN town hall, I did a couple of quick CNN interviews, and then I was there for the town hall. And I got to be a part of this event where it was clear the media has just a huge role in ensuring we will tell this story. The next morning, which for me really crystallized how important the media is to me, I did an interview on Morning Joe. I think we were scheduled for 4 or 5 minutes, and it ran, I think, 22. And Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski, they could not have been any more decent, any more compassionate, any more caring. And they just allowed me to tell my story, to talk about my daughter, to talk about what her loss meant to us, and to talk about where I think this country needs to go on this issue. After that interview, I never looked at the media in a negative way again. Now, listen, there are some people in media who clearly have agendas, and that's fine. You know, I mean, not everybody's perfect, but Almost everyone I've dealt with in media has had one goal: to make sure they're there to support people like me, victims of gun violence, and to continue telling these stories so that this country, unlike times in the past, doesn't walk away from this. You know, the one thing they all ask is, what can we do for you? And all I would ever say is, continue finding ways to tell this story. And I'm very thankful for them, because they have been helpers in such a huge way on this issue of gun violence. And right now, families like mine need helpers. You have 40,000 people a year in this country who are dying because of gun violence. We need helpers. And the media, they keep telling these stories. They are helpers, and I'm thankful for them.
What has been the response from the American people, and what about that response has surprised you?
That the majority of them want to do something about gun violence. You know, before my daughter was killed, I thought that there was a much bigger divide than there actually is. And what I've learned is, while the majority of American people, the majority of gun owners agree we need to do something, there is organizations whose leadership feels differently than most people, and they spend the money that holds the legislators and legislation hostage. So I really thought there were more people who were parts of these organizations who disagreed with what I want to do, and that's not the case. You can look at the polls. I mean, just look at background checks. Over 90% of all people in this country polled want to do something about background checks. And if you look at gun owners, the vast majority of them want to as well. This is not rocket science. We can do something. And most people agree. But, you know, when I look back upon that first week after Jamie was killed, and my desire to break the gun lobby, it's because the leadership of this lobby has used money to hold legislators and legislation hostage, and they've done it successfully, but they are now breaking. And this election, we are going to break them permanently. Their time is up.
If you could have the stars align and they could pass gun legislation that you would approve of, what would that look like? What would be the perfect scenario for you?
You know, so there's a lot of pieces to that. You know, we've got to first deal with background checks so that we know who's buying guns. I would extend that to ammunition, because you already have 400 million weapons on the streets of America today. And there are people who should not be in possession of a gun, but are, and they can walk into a store right now and freely buy ammunition and make that gun useful. So I would extend background checks to ammunition. I would ban high capacity magazines. I would ban assault weapons. But the vice president and soon to be president also knows, for me, if you want to solve this issue, you repeal PLCA, which is a law that right now shields the entire gun industry from lawsuits. If you want to change things, make the gun manufacturers and the gun industry similar to what happened with tobacco. What broke tobacco was litigation, okay? When those CEOs had to go on the stands and tell the truth about what they were doing and what they knew, it changed everything. Well, the CEOs of the gun industry know they're currently marketing their weapons to kids. They know kids are accessing those weapons. They know that they're building weapons at a rate higher than what they say their intended market is. They know those weapons are going to end up on the streets, and they know those weapons are going to be used to kill people like you and me. And they also know they're doing nothing about it. They are responsible. And so if you want to change things, you repeal PLCA, that changes everything, okay? Let us go after that industry. And I can assure you that industry is going to change the way they behave. We also need to study gun violence. So we need to fund it through the CDC. For too many years, The CDC has been unable to study this issue. They've been unable to call it what it is, which is a public health crisis. And they've been unable to make recommendations. Well, you know what? Let's change that. So there are so many things that we can do, and we can do them immediately if we change the president and flip the Senate. And come November 3rd, we are going to, because if we don't, your life could be at risk. And I don't want that to happen.